I mean, not been pointed out quite enough how embarrassing this is for Hezbollah that they had all these explosions 2 days ago, and they don't seem to have checked all their other devices. I mean, that's kind of the first thing you'll do is check all the other devices you got and recently bought. So, I mean, as Jonathan Conricus just said, I mean, this is a big psychological blow for Hezbollah, very for a whole host of reasons, the symbolism, the actual injuries caused to Hezbollah mid-ranking commanders and others. The symbolism of seeing men with their hands, eyes, groins so grievously wounded. It's a very intimate blow to the psyche of Hezbollah members is quite extraordinary. So I don't know if this can be replicated again. I mean, it's so unprecedented. You'd have to think hard about where you could follow this up in a similar way. But as you were saying earlier, the big question is what happens next.
And I suppose what happens next in terms of the population of Lebanon, of Beirut, because we were speaking to a correspondent earlier who was just saying that people are not, obviously they're not going out. There's no cars on the streets because people, they feel vulnerable. People who have nothing to do with Hezbollah, they don't know what's going to happen next, and that clearly that there's an impact on civilians as well.
Yeah, the hardest thing to gauge in Lebanon is public opinion because it's a very fractured society. And this, again, I suspect was part of Israel's thinking. If you think that when you go to the supermarket, the guy who's sitting next to you, standing next to you in the queue, might just have, be blown up in this way, and you might be a, incidental casualty. This has a great effect on you psychologically. I mean, Lebanon's a very psychologically damaged society. Years of war, the constant threat of being bombed by Israel, the constant threat of future factional conflict within the country, individual breakdown of the power supply because of the financial crisis, the Beirut explosion in the port 4 years ago. I mean, people are on edge, and for Hezbollah, this works both ways. The war has definitely in Gaza has definitely had a unifying effect on those already inclined to support Hezbollah, to gather around Hezbollah, different factions, including Christians and Sunnis. I've spoken to and I know who are much more united against Israel, but then there are of course also people who will be much more hostile to Hezbollah, saying, look what they've done to us, look what they've done to our society. They're the biggest, most powerful faction in Lebanese society. They promised us stability and peace, and they haven't delivered it. So there's also this incredible hostility, and that serves to break up Lebanon, which certainly serves Israel's purpose. But it makes the calculations about what happens next quite hard to read, because Hezbollah doesn't know whether it can go to war with Israel and maintain its popularity in Lebanon, whether it would increase it or whether it would destroy it forever. So it's the great puzzle of any faction that works in Lebanon to work out this balance.
Just a final thought, and you probably don't know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway, because the whole point, I suppose, of this attack on Hezbollah fighters, leaders, whatever they are, it's obviously a psychological thing, but it's to restrict those people. So do we know how effective it has been in terms of killing or injuring people within Hezbollah?
I think it has been quite effective. I mean, you'd have to have more insight into the actual structure of Hezbollah than they allow to journalists like me to know exactly what the effects are. But I see a lot of talk about this leading to escalation. But I do wonder whether Hezbollah is in a position immediately to go to war with Israel, given the damage it suffered. I mean, 2,000. I mean, that's not that's not a majority of Hezbollah members. They have tens of thousands of fighters to call on, but it's not an insignificant number either. And they're not going to be in the Hezbollah ground forces, that if you like, the grunts, are not going to be in a particularly positive frame of mind after seeing their colleagues and bosses and commanders, flown out of the country for eye surgery en masse.
Yes. Richard, thank you very much for that. That's the Times' correspondent, Richard Spencer, who lived and reported from Lebanon for many years.
Israel says it's entering a new stage of the war against Hezbollah. It's the only thing they've said that refers to the extraordinary events of the past 2 days. First pagers, then walkie-talkies exploded in simultaneous attacks on Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon. So where does Israel go now? The former IDF spokesperson Jonathan Conricus can join us. He's now a fellow at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. Jonathan, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's a great pleasure. Are you surprised that it's gone pagers, walkie-talkies? What do you expect to happen next?
Well, I think that the Israeli security forces have a few more aces up their sleeves, and I think that Hezbollah today and yesterday were probably really from surprise, disorientation, and frankly a lot of fear because a lot of electronics exploded, things that I think that Hezbollah weren't prepared for and thought that they could be immune from. But I think it's really important to understand the context of what's happening here. Israeli civilians have been under relentless Hezbollah rocket fire for about 11 and a half months. There's more than 70,000 Israeli civilians that have been forcibly displaced from their homes in northern Israel. And what they're saying to their government is, you need to bring us home. And that's the backdrop to Israeli statements and Israeli actions. And what the Israeli government is trying to do is to create the conditions that will facilitate a diplomatic agreement without necessarily having to go to war. That's how I read the latest events.
So you feel this is a way of destabilizing Hezbollah to the point where they'll do a deal, rather than this is softening them up because Israeli tanks are going to go into Lebanon?
Yes, if the quite magnificent cyber attack here on Hezbollah communication systems was intended to be part of a strike, then surely it would have made much more better sense if first the strike came and then a ground invasion or a massive barrage of Israeli rockets towards Hezbollah targets. But that hasn't come, and I think that indicates that really the intention here is to signal to Hezbollah that Israel is willing to escalate, yet still trying and looking for every possible diplomatic solution that won't make it necessary to go to war. And I think that the Israeli targets are actually very minimalistic. It's not about dismantling Hezbollah from their weapons. It's not about cutting the ties between the Islamic Republic of Iran and Hezbollah. It's just about getting Israelis back to their homes.
You use the term cyber attack, which I think is an interesting term, because no doubt this has been an intelligence coup. It's been a military coup in the sense of it is a brilliant way of destabilizing an enemy. It is going after them through their communication device, which is why I know you use the term cyber attack. But it is more than a cyber attack, because it is also an attack involving explosions, and explosions that you can't entirely control if you're Israel. They are targeted to Hezbollah fighters, but they have taken out other people. You can't control where a fighter might be standing. You can't control who picks up a pager. A child has indeed picked up a pager and then been killed as a result of that. So this is not entirely targeted, because there will be people who die who are innocent. Do you accept that? And is that something, is a price that you think you're willing to pay openly? What do you make of the fact that this is going to carry with it the cost to innocent people?
Well, I think that in the history of warfare, there's never been a more precise and surgical attack on enemy combatants than this specific Israeli attack. And of course, any loss of civilian life is regrettable. But in this case, I think that you'd be hard to find any other example where the ratio between combatant and non-combatant struck in a single military action was as outstanding as this one, which of course doesn't take it likely that, according to Hezbollah information, a child was killed. That is unfortunate. But at the end of the day, looking at more than 4,500 Hezbollah operatives, senior commanders and mid-rank commanders that have been wounded or killed, and that's a very significant number. And I think with the best possible ratio of non-combatants. And frankly, I think that, Israel hardly gets a break from anybody when it comes to how it defends itself. Sometimes Israel should act differently. In this case, when only Hezbollah terrorists have been killed, I think people could actually really take a pause and say, well, this was brilliantly done, attacking terrorists and terrorists only, with extremely, extremely low amounts of non-combatants killed.
Jonathan, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. That's Jonathan
Thank you.
Conricus there. He's a former IDF spokesperson.